Hello, it looks like the speed networking went a little bit long, but I'm glad you all could make it. My name is Ellie Mistal. I'm an editor of Above the Law, and you are at the Law Degrees of Separation, Different Way to Put Your JDs to Work panel. This is supposed to be the fun panel where we tell you people that you don't have to be a lawyer for the rest of your lives. So we really are looking forward to your questions. We're going to have a panel discussion, and then we'll have a question and answer period where you can ask us really whatever you want about getting out of the law or doing something non-traditional with your JD. For some housekeeping, I am to tell you to please turn off your cell phones because we are taping, and apparently cell phone noises are scary. For the question and answer session, we just want you to wait till you get to the mic for your question. And I'm also to remind you that your question should be both short and in a question form. So Jeopardy rules for your questions. I want to introduce the panel. I've asked them all to give me a short bio for them and a fun fact, so I'm going to go through that really quickly. And then as we get into it, they'll have a chance to expound on their varied experiences. To my immediate left is Susanna Welford-Shakow. She is the president and founder of Running Start, which inspires young women and girls to go into political leadership. She also founded Women Under 40 Political Action Committee, which is also dedicated to inspiring young women. Her fun fact is that while by day she spends all of this time inspiring young women, by night she's actually the mother of twin boys. So I guess that's kind of keeping the universe in balance.
I think so, exactly.
Next up is Carlos Sandoval. He is a filmmaker, and he's made the award-winning film Farmingville and A Class Apart. He's the founder of Camino Bluff Productions. Carlos says that he decided to go to law school by looking in the New York Times and realizing how many jobs there were for lawyers. Obviously, if that happened today, nobody would go to law school ever again. But next up is Dawn Smalls. She is the director of she's the director at the Ford Foundation, which is just an awesome job. If you don't know what the Ford Foundation does, I mean, they do a lot of really good work. In college, Dawn was a competitive ballroom dancer, and I have to say, Dawn, dancing with the law sounds like the best 3L gut that I've ever heard of.
I'm all about it. Let's do it.
Next up is John Heredia. He is a partner and brand manager at the Couch Sessions, which is dubbed as the Tastemaker's Tastemaker for urban music and culture. John has a great fun fact. When he was 16 years old and living in the Philippines, he came out with a hit rap album that apparently had just set the country ablaze. People were asking for his autograph. He was going on TV. Somehow he still ended up in law school. So I guess, being awesome and cool isn't as fun as it sounds. And then last up is Patty First. She's a principal at the Rabin Group, which is a consulting group. Patty used to work at the DOJ, but she left when she realized that she was working for John Ashcroft. I had a whole joke, but I realized I didn't sweep the room for bugs, and I promised my wife I wouldn't end up at Gitmo again this week. So we're just going to leave that one, let that one lie. Really quickly, before we really get into it, I want to ask, just for our edification to the audience, how many of you are still in law school now? Wow. You guys do not read Above the Law, do you? All right, then. With that as our kind of base, I want to open it up to the panel. We'll start with Susanna. The first question that I have for these guys is, fundamentally, how did you get out of practicing law? We all know how you got into it. How did you get out?
Okay, so I actually think the question of how I got out is equally interesting to how I got in. I never, ever wanted to be a lawyer. I don't know how many of you all in the room felt the same way, but my father was a lawyer. I spent summers working at his law practice, and I wanted to do many things, but law was not one of them. But my fiance convinced me to go because he'd bring his course catalog. He was going, and he would show me all of these fabulous courses, and he sold me. And I loved law school and loved the practice of law, but always knew that what I really wanted to do was politics. And part of the reason I went to law school is I realized everybody in DC, you look around and see what the most interesting people in DC are doing and look at their background, they're all lawyers. So I thought, okay, this is good background. So when I was working in a law firm, I did political law. I lobbied federal and state governments and did a lot of things that really didn't seem like law to me, seemed more like politics, which I loved. And so the way that I got out, I was working with young, idealistic associates, and we would go up to the hill.
Before they were crushed.
Right, right. This is the first couple of years. And so we would go up to the hill and we would do our lobbying meetings. And 9 times out of 10, we're talking to a male, either lawmaker or chief of staff, and we started talking at lunch and saying, well, wait a minute, where are the women? Where are the women who are our age and who look like us? So we started a group called the Women Under 40 Political Action Committee. And the idea was, let's try to elect some young women who to Congress, so we can have more people there who look like us. And so eventually we started it while we were all still working at the law firm, and I was the first to leave the firm to go and really to run the group, because we'd done it sort of in our part-time, and we realized we needed a full-time director. So that is how I got out.
Interesting. So it sounds like your story, you're part of getting out, you started while you were still in.
I did. That's right.
Carlos, when you have a serious transition from law to filmmaking, how did that work out for you?
Well, I think law in some ways was one stage of a sort of loop around career life. I had 10 years between college and law school, and I really tried to avoid the law because the way I grew up in Southern California in the barrios, we were sort of on the wrong end of the law. And I got to know the law through my brother, who was very much a juvenile delinquent, and so I would see his lawyers on the other side of that glass panel. I thought, that's not what I want to do. I stayed away from it as long as possible. But eventually, actually literally sat down and looked, because I had a bunch of interesting jobs. I worked as a program officer for a think tank, worked as a member of the U.S. delegation to the UN, did some book publishing stuff along the way. So I was a gadfly. And found myself in a position where I had to, was no longer the bright young thing, had to think seriously about what was the next step, and sat down one Sunday with the classified section of the New York Times, and I thought, yeah, there are a lot of lawyers out there, maybe that's what I should think of. But actually, in many ways, like Suzanne thought, the law degree was fungible, that it would put me in good stead, it'd give me credibility, I'd be able to do a variety of things. So I went and I did practice for 10 years. I hit a health crisis, is really the way I got out of the law. It was not so much by choice, but circumstance. And I really needed to take a break, and started my transition through writing, because that was the way I was trying to sort of find myself back into health. And that writing ended up in the filmmaking, which is a long, involved story. But suffice it to say, I got involved with an issue, thought something needed to be done about it, which was illegal immigration and the sort of rise of race around it, and as a result of the hate-based attempted murder of 2 day laborers on the eastern end of Long Island. And I initiated a project, and eventually someone turned to me and said, you're the producer, you make the decision, and there I was, the filmmaker, by default. So that's sort of the career path.
Dawn?
So my answer is similar to Susanna's, in the sense that I started off with an internship before college that put high school students in local, state, and federal internships in Massachusetts state government, and I ended up interning for a federal court judge and in the U.S. Attorney's Office. And then my first job out of college was in the Clinton White House as the assistant to John Podesta. And I say that because I always had as a frame of reference people who were lawyers, but were in public service. And not only that, people who had some fluidity in their career. It wasn't that law was a box that you were in and couldn't come out and do other things, but there was some fluidity between moving into public service or a government position and practicing law and potentially doing other things. So that, for me, was always my frame, and that's always how I looked at my law degree and my career. So that was all prior to entering law school, and that was definitely the direction that I had once I graduated law school. I did graduate. I was an associate for almost 3 years at Boyce Schiller in New York. And at that point, I decided that, I thought the firm was fine. I'm not one of those people that hated it, but I also knew that that was not a long-term trajectory for me.
Did you not like money?
Oh, I liked the money. There was no problem with the money, and particularly with my loans. That was a good period. That was where I needed to be at that point. But I did start to feel antsy. I did not want to feel I did not want to be locked in. And I do think that as you get further along at a firm, it can be harder to transition, or at least that was my perception at the time. And so as I became, you know, I guess a fourth-year associate, I really pressed hard to try to think about other things that I could do. The jobs were not here in DC, just given the administration. And so then transition from Boyce Schiller over to a position at the Open Society Foundations, which is George Soros's foundation working on democracy issues.
That's the guy with some money. Yeah. John.
Well, before law school and everything, I loved music, and I was a music head, and as Ellie so graciously put, I was a rap whatever. And star, yeah, in the Philippines, so that's a 15 seconds, not 15 minutes.
So cool.
But, you know, my decision to go to law school was completely different from my love for music. I'm also a Filipino American, and my family had a lot of issues in immigration, so I decided to go to law school to get versed in immigration law. And before law school, and during law school, college, I worked for the Asian Law Caucus, a lot of these legal aid societies for Asian Americans. So I was definitely embedded in that sector. And then after I graduated, I practiced with the Division of Human Rights in New York. I was a prosecutor, and then I stayed in that field for about 2 years. But I never lost my love for music, and throughout my whole career, as a teenager all the way up to after law school, I built good relationships with people in the music industry. So once they realized that I was a lawyer, they automatically associated me with some sort of prestige, and they wanted to recruit me into the entertainment business. So after my stint as a prosecutor, I worked for Brooklyn Bodega, which produces the Brooklyn Hip Hop Festival under the Brooklyn Bridge. And you know, we produced large concerts with Kanye West, Talib Kweli, and a whole slew of other big artists. And from there, I just transitioned over to not sticking with one type of music festival, one-off type things, and I decided to partner with the Couch Sessions, which is a creative agency, and my partner Stone is right over there. So, and now I'm here.
So when in that trajectory did you actually leave your practice?
After being with the Division of Human Rights, and I was investigating sexual harassment cases, and you know, it just wasn't for me. I realized that music is my passion, and I just decided to go with what I love.
Now, Patty, you had the awesome law and politics job. So how did you decide to leave?
Well, I had a little bit of a different trajectory. So I knew in law school that I didn't want to work for a firm. I just, you know, I was never drawn to contracts or the third-year seminar on tax. I was drawn to immigration and human rights and feminist jurisprudence and. I see a lot of heads nodding. And so I did a ton of internships in law school, particularly around immigration and human rights, that led to me coming to DC to work as a legal intern for the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, my last semester of law school. And that led to my first job out of law school, which was with Senator Kennedy on the Senate Judiciary Committee. I was one of his immigration counsel, which was a bit daunting at 25 or whatever you are when you graduate. To do that. So I was there and had amazing experiences and learned a lot about law and policy and politics and how laws are made. But you know, it was very much not a traditional law job. And then I went to DOJ and did some legislative work at DOJ under Janet Reno. Then unfortunately, she wasn't there anymore. But in the meantime, I had switched. I had decided, I don't know if others have had this feeling, but I really always had this nagging feeling that I needed to do litigation at some point, you know, like for either credibility or that was something that I was supposed to do as a lawyer. So I went to the Civil Rights Division for 2 years, and I litigated voting rights cases, and it was fascinating and fantastic and a wonderful experience, except for the fact that the people that I ultimately worked for in the Ashcroft Justice Department and I didn't really have the same view of voting rights. So, and I think there is some kind of universal law out there that you can't actually work for a long time for Senator Kennedy and for John Ashcroft at the same time. So I ended up leaving, and in the meantime, my boss in legislative affairs, Robert Rabin, had started the Rabin Group, and I came on as employee number 3. We knew that we wanted to do political consulting and strategy, and just kind of started doing it. And that was 9 years ago, and it's 10 years ago actually. 9 years ago since I joined, but 10 years ago since he started it. And it's grown and grown and grown, and we're now over 40 people and have a pretty robust practice.
One of the things that I hope you're hearing from the panel so far is that you're talking about people who, for the most part, had non-traditional legal stuff in their heads long before they went to law school. And at least for some of the people here, they started building that, what would end up being in their career, a lot of times in law school. We're not talking about a lot of people who kind of took the LSAT, scored really highly, and was like, well, I'll go to law school because I can't think of anything better to do. And for the most part, if you want to get out of being a lawyer, you have to kind of go into the legal practice with an understanding of what you might want to do with that JD that's not being a lawyer. Now, I think it was Carlos who said that it wasn't a box, but Dawn was the one who brought up, I think, where a lot of current law students, a lot of recent graduates do feel boxed in, and that's the debt. So I would just kind of throw this out to everybody, like, how did you, because I would imagine, at least at first, you're taking the salary cut to go from whatever you're doing with the law to whatever you're not doing with the law, even if that's eventually going to make you more money than you could have made as a lawyer. So how did you kind of manage your own debt, the crushing sadness of it, the lack of funds? Like, how did you manage that? Just anybody who...
I went to a firm. I mean, realistically, if you're taking on, a lot of loans to finance your law school education, I actually am not one of those people that vilify working at a law firm. I didn't hate it. It wasn't what I wanted to do with my life, long term. I'm also not somebody that says that I've absolutely left the law. I mean, I could potentially go back, and that goes back to my earlier point about fluidity. I mean, I had, everyone needs role models, and for me, I was very lucky to have examples very early in my career of people that moved in and out of the law and moved in and out of government and public service and did lots of interesting different roles. But, in the course of doing that, I mean, there are bills to pay, and if you don't come from a financial circumstance where your parents can float you or anything else, I mean, one of the very real, I think, options is to take a job at a firm where you get great training. At least I did. I definitely did my share of document review, but I also got to take depositions and work on high-profile cases and so on. And as you pointed out, I earned a lot of money that I was able to put away and put towards my loans.
John, over the phone, you had said that you were nearly debt-free, or?
Right, yeah, I mean, I'm not really even outside of the practice still. I mean, when I'm not working on the couch sessions, I, on the side, represent Wu-Tang Clan and the Rocksmith Tokyo, which is a fashion apparel brand. So,
ridiculously awesome.
Right, so, I mean, when, with the couch sessions, it's one of those businesses where, we're growing, we're building a foundation, but when, there are bills that need to be paid, the RZA gives me a call and asks for a licensing contract or something like that. So, yeah, so there's ways that you could balance a quasi professional, a legal profession, as well as being outside of the legal arena.
Susanna and Patty?
I just had a quick comment because I do agree that most people, what they do is they go to a firm for a couple of years. I also never wanted to work at a firm, but I think that you know, you need to set your sights high. And I wanted to work in politics, but I sort of needed to work in a law firm. So I found a law firm that did exactly what I wanted to do. So, and it was filled with public officials who'd retired. So I had Ann Richards and Bob Dole and all sorts of other people. I mean, it was perfect for me. And I think sometimes people think, I've got to join this law firm and I have to be miserable for a couple of years. And I think that you should go into it thinking, look around, there are lots and lots of firms, and so many of them specialize and do really interesting things. So just keep looking, and maybe you will find something that really does make you happy.
Patty?
I guess I would just say, as the person I think on the panel who's still paying off debt.
No, I'm
You're still paying off debt too. Okay. Yeah, I'm on, you know, the 30.
It never goes away.
It never goes away. I'm on the 30-year plan.
No.
And I didn't go to a firm, but I also did that knowing the risk that I would be paying it off this long, and hoping that it would all work out. I think especially in law school and in your first maybe 5 or 10 years practicing, you really think and worry a lot about what's my next career move, you know, where am I going, what am I supposed to be doing, where am I supposed to be? And I guess what I would urge people to do is to think about the kinds of things that make you happy and what you want to do, and then figure out a way to get there, and to be persistent about it, and you know, kind of constantly reevaluating it, and to not worry so much about the how, or the money, or, you know, just looking for the opportunities where they are, and if they're not there, then trying to create them on your own.
You know, and I'll throw this out there because I would imagine that most of the panelists have too much, we'll call it personal pride, to even throw this out there as an option, but since it's my story, I don't quite mind. One of the real important tricks that I did to get out is that I married well.
There you go.
You know, I went from making, you know, a big-time Debevoise salary to making $500 a week as a, you know, basically, you know, intern staff writer at a publication nobody here has ever heard of. And I wouldn't have been able to do that, quite frankly, if I didn't have a wife who was A, very, you know, understanding about these things, and B, could continue to pay our bills. We didn't have to move apartments. We didn't have to significantly reduce our standard of living. I was able to get out and explore and find myself while, you know, somebody got her ass up every day and went to the firm. So, you know, and that's, you know, it's another, you remember, like for a lot of people who are trying to get in or get out or trying to figure out what to do, for a lot of you, you're not going to be doing it alone. You're going to have a family, you're going to have a support system, and you don't know which end of that you'll be. You might be the person that needs the support. You might be the person that's getting some support. But remember, it's not, for most of you, your life will not just be your own personal thing. It'll be in connection with other people in your life. Carlos, you mentioned, and I think this is really important, you mentioned that you had done a lot of work before you went to law school. How did that then inform your decision to leave or to not practice law?
Probably not well enough in that I did go and I did practice. I mean, it informed it in that I knew that there were a lot of interesting and creative things that could be done out there, and that I wanted to be able to follow through on them. But at that time, and again, I emphasize that I'm you know, older in this crowd, and at that time there was you could still with a BA get around and do an awful lot. But it was just a transition point where you needed an advanced degree to really be able to move forward. So I did solidify myself in some ways. And you know, that's sort of the route that I took. But Ellie, I want to come back to what you just said a second ago about that support group aspect, because I do have a partner who is very supportive, and that's created that sort of a college or environment for me that's allowed me to go off and pursue. And I also travel very light. I mean, you know, no real obligations in that regard, with regard to children and worrying about those sorts of worries. So that enabled me to take that route as well. Yeah.
And Patty, you went straight through. So you're kind of on the opposite end of the prior work experience angle.
I did, and that cropped up early in my career in odd ways. In that, I didn't have the office skills necessarily that you would have if you had worked somewhere after, you know, between college and law school. So I worked at a law firm doing immigration law during law school. And I remember trying to have to figure out how to line up, you know, the text on an envelope, things like that, how to use the fax machine, because I didn't know. I had never had that kind of job before. And, you know, it was just something that, luckily I realized it at the time, and I really tried to be a sponge for all of that and learn it quickly. But, you know, I knew I wanted to go to law school. I knew what I wanted to do. So I think at the time I thought, let's just go do it. But yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about the toolbox, because one of the interesting things about having the law school training is that wherever you go after you get out of law school, you're always going to be typecast as a lawyer, and you're always going to be expected to be able to do certain lawyerly things. So I remember, I think on the phone, Dawn, we were talking about that toolbox that you get from law school that you can then apply to lots of different areas. What do you think are some of the tools in that box? What are lawyers supposed to be able to do?
Yeah, I think there's kind of a base level expectation that you know how to handle yourself, for lack of a better word. Seriously, like presentation, judgment, as you go in and out of different types of careers. I do think you're given a certain amount of deference that you know that you can handle yourself, and you have a certain amount of judgment. Obviously, writing and analytical skills. And then, you know, presentation and otherwise. But, you know, I also said that there, you know, as you transition, I think, in and out of different careers, you're definitely typecast as a lawyer. I mean, I've gone into positions in politics. I've moved in and out of the administration. And I knew as I entered into those different arenas that I did not want to be a practicing attorney. But as you approach people and you say, I want to operate in this different space, the first thing they do is see your JD and say, well, you can go work in our general counsel's office. And, you know, there's nothing wrong with that. Those are great jobs. That's just not why I was sitting in that seat looking for a job in that particular arena. So, you know, perseverance, you know, to Susanna's earlier comment, you have to know what you want to do. If you're passive, you will get slotted, whether that's either at a firm or in another field in the general counsel's office. But if you know that you want to do something else, you have to have the conviction and the clarity to say, no, I actually don't want to go be a lawyer over here. This is what I want to do.
Look, I spent 2 years trying to not write a legal column. And look where I am now, right? There is you kind of get into, you get streamed, and swimming upstream against that can be difficult sometimes. Yeah. John,
Well, I mean, I'm sure everybody here knows that when we all took, or if you guys will take constitutional law class, that we're all expected to read about 200 pages in one day. So, you know, that kind of training, well, it trains us to analyze large swaths of information at a very quick pace. And that puts us at an advantage when we're talking to an employer who puts a pressure on us to meet deadlines and whatnot. So that's something that is that's very beneficial for us. And another thing too, we IRAC everything. You know?
Yeah, I thought about that.
So basically, like, I mean, now that being outside of the legal arena, the R in the IRAG, you know, we're not falling back on some statute or anything like that, but, you know, we fall back on customary trade practices or something like that. So, you know, just analyzing issues and having that deadline, meeting it, and that definitely puts us in an advantage.
Do you serve as GC for CAP sessions? Do you serve as GC for your company?
Well, when there are legal issues like incorporation, LLC, and I do all this stuff like that.
And that, to me, that's working for a small business, for a startup, one of the great things is that we don't have to spend I mean, we do have outside counsel now as we're big enough, but in the early days, we didn't have to spend the money on lawyers that I think other startups have to spend, because me and my co-editor, David Ladd, I mean, we have that training and background that we at least, you know, not that we're going to handle every legal issue, but we know we can see them coming.
No, we hire a tax attorney. So.
You're going to jump in, Susanna?
No, I was just going to say, having started a political action committee and then a nonprofit with absolutely no knowledge about how to run either of those, it was nice to at least have my legal background so that I could write, you know, I could do the FEC filings, and I could, in the beginning, do a little bit of our tax work, and just having that credential, it really gave weight. And I think the other way that I really have felt very pleased that I have a law degree is, as the president of a nonprofit, my job is to go out and sell my mission to everybody and anybody who will listen. So everybody from sponsors to the press. And I found that my resume, my CV, opens doors because I have that credential of a JD. And it's not just that I have lots of contacts from working in the law firm and from law school, but I think I am seen as a more serious person because of the law degree. Is that necessarily fair? I don't know. I don't necessarily think so, but
have you seen some of these non-lawyers running around here?
Although I have to say, and I'm sure that this has happened to everybody at this table, the number of times people have come up to me with a problem that they have that they think that I should know exactly how to solve. You know, a tree fell on their garage that was in their neighbor's yard, and they want me to tell them what to do about it. And I have to explain very carefully, I have absolutely no idea. I have no idea. But I can tell you who to talk to, so that
often
helps.
family members.
Yeah, exactly.
If I could jump in on the toolbox question for just a moment, which is that in some ways, and in very strange ways, as I look back at my relatively brief film career, law has informed a lot of what I've done. And it's in some ways by chance, but not entirely. In the first film that I did, which was about immigration on Long Island, I was very analytic in my approach to it and tried to be objective in trying to see various sides. I think that objectivity really came from the experience of being a policy wonk, having worked in policy, having been a lawyer. And it was that approach which got the film recognition and gave it credibility. So in an odd way, that toolbox came into play very distinctively there. And it has informed, the film I did after that was about a group of Mexican-American lawyers who took up a case to the Supreme Court the first time, the question of what and who Mexican-Americans were, and the extent of the 14th Amendment back in 1954, that I was drawn to that because I was a lawyer. So that law can inform the way you go about things, even in the oddest ways, at moments where you don't expect it. I am also, though, I kind of suffer from that with other creative people around me who, my editor, my co-producer will sometimes say, there you go, being a lawyer again, not getting the passion, not getting the moment, not understanding the humanity of it. And I have to sit there and kind of plead guilty every once in a while, but it also is what undergirds the work. So that pigeonholing can also come out at odd times.
I think that one of the things that you really have to learn once you're practicing that they don't teach you in law school. You know, they teach you the critical thinking, they teach you the writing, which I use every day at work and just in life. But one of the things that they don't really teach you is how to sell yourself and how to sell the skills that you've learned in law school to other jobs, so to either non-legal jobs or less traditional legal jobs, or so that somebody can look at your resume and they see that you're a lawyer, but they also see everything else that you've done. Because sometimes people just stop at the lawyer and make a lot of assumptions. So I remember when I was, this is a bit of a reverse example, but when I was going from the Office of Legislative Affairs at DOJ to trying to become a voting rights attorney, the people in voting said to me, well, why do you want to come here? Why do you want to be a litigator? What skills have you learned doing political and policy work that are going to translate into being able to be a good litigator? And I had to, really think critically about it and sell the fact that you know, prepping a witness for a hearing is really similar to prepping a witness for a deposition. And being able to read a lot of material and synthesize it down to 5 talking points is really what a judge needs to see as well. So you have to be flexible and learn how to sell your skills and to really give your skills the credit that they deserve. I think the other point that I'd make is sometimes you have to protect the fact that you're a lawyer. And by that I mean, I'll give you one example on that. My first deposition ever, the opposing counsel looked at me and he said, "Do you need the caption for the case?" And I looked at him and I said, "I'm the lawyer, I'm not the court reporter." He just assumed I was the woman in the room. I was the young woman in the room. I must be the court reporter. And I was like, I'm here representing the United States. So sometimes you really just have to like protect that space and protect your degree. Really.
It goes back to one of the things Susanna said, that having the law degree does add an air of seriousness to your entire resume.
I just wanted to add one more thing about the toolbox, and one of the realizations that I came to over the course of my law school education, which is that law school tests a very narrow set of skills. So I think that's one of the things that you appreciate when you move out of the law. You know, there are a lot of people that did really well in law school that would not do well in any of the roles that we currently have. So I say that because there's just so many law students in the room, and as you stress over finals and outlines and all the things you stress about in law school, you should continue to stress about those things, but just know that we are multifaceted people, we are multi-talented people, and that law school really does test a very narrow set of skills. You may have a different set of skills that, you know, will totally blossom and make you a rock star in something that is outside the very narrow practice of law. So just a program note, the sort of back end of the toolbox question.
I also like to return to the selling yourself point, again, from the perspective of a law student. You have to understand that, you know, I'll put in the personal. My resume for getting legal jobs was completely different than my resume for getting non-legal jobs, even though I'm still fundamentally working with the same facts, right? Just the way that you organize yourself to appeal to a law firm, you know, for me, I went to Harvard Law School. It was right up, you know, big bold letters. It was doing a little dance, because that's all you need. You know, that's what they care about. Now when I go and try to get a non-legal job, that's at the bottom. It's like the last thing that I talk about, because most employers don't care where you went to school. They care what you've done. Legal employers, they care in a much different way, right? So you have to understand when you're trying to do something non-traditional, something different, that your resume is no longer going to look like all of your friends' resumes if you want to really be competitive at a non-traditional and non-legal job. I wanted to ask, and I think this is, again, so important, where did you guys find some of your opportunities? Because I think that a lot of people end up being a lawyer because that's what's coming down the pipe. that's what's coming into your inbox every day. That's what's on Simplicity every day. Lawyer, 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 lawyer. Where do you go to find, not, you know, are we supposed to go to Monster? Like what would you guys suggest?
Wow. I mean, so I went into law school knowing the direction that I wanted to go, which was politics. But I do think that, so I'm married to a lawyer who went to law school. He always knew he wanted to go to law school, graduated, and he's worked at the same firm now since 1998. He loves it. But I mean, he had that very direct path. So we're total opposites when you look at our careers. And I do think that the key really is you need to look to your private time after work or after class to explore other options. So my husband, even though he does this narrow focus and has done it for so long, he is involved with lots of boards. He does a lot of community service work, and so he is involved with a world that could lead him outside of the firm at some point. And I do think there sometimes is that tunnel vision with lawyers, especially because we work so incredibly hard in firms that the hours are tremendous and you're really expected to dedicate all of yourself to the firm, that it's hard sometimes to spend, to carve out that bit of free time to do things that are creative and different and absolutely outside of the law. So.
And I think that that's absolutely true. Networking is a way of creating opportunities. I'm both a director and a producer. As a producer, it is incumbent upon me, if I want my vision to come to fruition, to go out and network. I say I work longer hours and earn less money as a filmmaker than I ever did as a lawyer, but I have to extend those hours even further in order to make certain I am out there. I'm hustling. I'm making that myself known. But that's also true, I think, in any place. Particularly if you're looking to make a transition, you have to have some ideas to where you want to go, and then work backwards from there and determine what networks might get you out there. Who might you know? It's sort of the real-life version of LinkedIn, And the other part of that, I think, is what Don said, I think, earlier was very, very important in terms of being passive about what you want to do versus knowing what you want to do and persisting in getting it. You can go either way. Just know that at some point you may be drifting along, and the more direct way is if you know what your goal is going to be and you set out and you set yourself to accomplish it. The last thing I'll say about opportunities is you create them. I was very fortunate in that. I mean, for me, it was a combination of passivity and aggression, and I guess I'm passive aggressive. But creating that opportunity by recognizing when this moment came that I could go along and pursue this film. But I created my company. I created those opportunities. I hustled. I networked. I wrote the proposals. I got the money. I did the job. That was creation of an opportunity. So it's there are various ways in which one can go about creating those opportunities and achieving them.
Right, and to echo Carlos, it's very, very important to network. I mean, that's basically half of the whole struggle. As a law student, it's so easy to just, put yourself in a cave and study, but creating opportunities is all based on personal relationships. And for me, I just went through my Rolodex. So that's decade. I can't believe it's
Rolodex. What?
But yeah, I went through my Rolodex, and I just told people that my contact list, and my address book, my MacBook. No, but I had no shame in my game. I'm trying to go a different route, and I please just lead me the right direction, and then after somebody took the bait, and then from there, referrals, you do a good job, then you get referred. So personal networking is key. So
every single one of my jobs in my legal career has been because somebody recommended me for the next step. So when I went to work for Senator Kennedy, it was because the woman who did the legislative work for the UN High Commissioner for Refugees in DC knew that there was an opening and recommended me, so I got in before there was a formal job process. If I had to compete, I don't think that I would have gotten the job, to be honest. But every single job has built on the previous job and has been because of recommendations. So networking is really important, but I want to go back to something that Carlos and others have said, which is that knowing where you want to go is really key. And it's not that you have to know everything about your next step. Doing informational interviews is okay, but I have to say, being on the receiving end of networking now, it drives me nuts when someone comes to me and says, well, here's my resume, I've been thinking about this or maybe that, and it's like, what do you want to do? And if they can't answer that question for me, then I can't help them. No matter how great a person they are or how much I like them, if they don't really know what they want to do, then there's no place for me to send them as a next step. It makes it much harder for me to know who to recommend them to. So the more work that you can do to really hone in on that, the better off you'll be.
So I'm glad that Patty said to me the magic word, which is informational interview. We are sitting in our nation's capital. It is a way of life here. If you don't know about them, find out about them. You would be surprised how many people, by even just a cold email, with a very vague point of connection. You know, I went to your college, I was in the Boy Scout troop from home, whatever it is, and you had an interesting career, would you sit down with me? We'll take a meeting to meet with you. It's very much part of the culture in DC. I can't speak to the rest of the country, but it is very much part of the culture of DC. And so you send out 10 of these emails, maybe you get one person to say yes, but guess what? That one person could know of the job before it's posted and think you're compelling enough to pass your name along. So, I mean, it goes along with all of the themes that everyone's been talking about in the answer to this question in terms of networking and having some clarity and vision about what you want to do. But my answer was very much informational interviews, and I'm sure you can do them outside of DC as well, but you should really take it upon yourself to look for people whose career you would like to emulate. I mean, if you don't have an exact job or can't do your exact path, but you can see a series of people who are doing things you would like to do and whose career you would like to emulate, reach out to them and ask them if they would meet with you for a few minutes and talk a little bit about how they got there.
And I'll echo that, because I know you're law students, you hear the word networking, you just want to stab your eye out. I get it. That's what I get it, right? But so I'll echo that by going back to one of the things that I actually try to say a lot on the site, and sometimes people get angry, but what the heck do you want to do with your life? That's the question. That's the only question. That's the first, second, third, 18th question. What do you actually want to do? Once you figure out what you want to do, how you go from where you are to where you need to be becomes, I don't want to say easier, but clearer. You have a better idea. These networking things that people keep talking about, if you don't know what you want to do, it sounds ridiculous. Why would you email somebody that you went to, like you said, Boy Scouts? Why would you do that? I would never do that. Well, you would never do that because you don't want to be a, Boy Scout troop leader. If you did, and you knew it, all of a sudden, emailing your former Boy Scout colleagues now makes a lot more sense. I had a lot of friends when I was coming out who did writing this. They were like, creative writers, just these guys that when I was in college, I couldn't stand them. I certainly wasn't Facebook friends with them. Screw these people, right? I was going to be a lawyer. Once I realized that I wasn't going to be a lawyer, and I wanted to be a writer, and I was a terrible writer, and I needed to get better, suddenly these people that, 10 years ago, I didn't want to even know. Suddenly these people became people that I was like, hey, long time no see. Oh, we should get a beer or something. People now do it to me in the same way. I will go, it's not that, it's not that hard. I will go, if you buy my drink, I will go wherever you want me to go and sit and talk for as long as the drinks are coming, right? I mean, it's not. So I know that the networking word sounds big and scary and annoying, but it's once you figure out what you want to do, things tend to make sense from there. We only have a little bit of time before I want to open it up for questions from the audience. So kind of to end on a slightly positive note, because I know how most of you are going to answer it. If you had it to do over again, so now given where you are in your career and everything you've learned since you went to law school, if you had to do over again, would you go back and go to law school? Like I would, because I know a lot more about pyrotechnics and flamethrowers and how to destroy things now, but that's me. What would you guys do? Let's start on the end and come down. Would you go back to law school?
I would, definitely. I think my heart has always been with the law, on the policy side and on kind of making laws and making laws better. But yeah, I definitely would go to law school again. Although I would think a little more seriously about it and how to finance it if I were going now, given the economy, than in the 90s, when everything was glorious.
Models and models.
Yeah, I would definitely go back to law school. Once you graduate and you got that JD and you have your bar license, I mean, you own that, and nobody can take that away from you. And once employers are interviewing you, you know, that's already an automatic prestige right there. And then you're going to have an advantage as far as the, you know, your job totem pole. But, you know, going back, thinking about it now, you know, when my first, you know, the first class were like contracts and corporations, I was scared of numbers, you know, and now I deal with numbers. So, you know, echoing what everybody here said, you need to know what you want to do once you're in law school, and then nothing will scare you. So, yeah, that's my answer.
Not even math.
Because I was scared of math too.
Yeah, that's true. But yeah, no, really, I mean, you just have to know, because, you know, with the whole networking thing, I mean, once you know what you're going to do, you know what networking to go to, you know what classes to take in law school. So if I was going to take it all back, I would really get a better picture of what my 20-year plan is. So, yeah.
Yes, I would definitely go back to law school. I think for all of the reasons that we've talked about on this panel. I'm somebody that has moved in and out of several different, you know, different areas, and every single time I had a benchmark, or a floor would probably be a better way of saying it, that I was a lawyer. So even if they couldn't really wrap their minds around what to do with me, or what I could do for that organization, I had this floor that I was an attorney, and I had you know, a certain set of skills to offer. So I think I've gotten my money's worth. I want to clarify that I am still paying off my loans, but it's definitely something I would do again.
I go back, but with a couple of big qualifiers. One is that I would really, if I had to do over again, I would really look into myself and try to figure out what is it that I'm about, what is it that I want to do, and then look outward to see what some of the career paths are within law. Because law, I think, is really a pretty big universe, as a pretty creative one. And I thought I needed to be a litigator, so I went the litigation route. And being a litigator in New York, you really have to be a big, use the A word there and fill in the blank. And I just wasn't that personality type. It was not the route for me to have gone. I ruminate more. I probably would have been happier as a tax lawyer or a trusted estates lawyer, you know, or really gone a bit more down that policy route. So I think that I would have done more of a personal assessment and have that reflect the courses that I took and the kinds of associations that I would have developed in law school more. And this is a sort of offshoot of the networking aspect, but I think that within law school, I would have also looked more towards my classmates than I did. Not that I didn't have some great friends out of it, but I didn't utilize that community in ways that I probably should have. And I think that's where one of the things that I would have done differently in going back, because I think that would have given me a better way to reflect myself, reflect off what the opportunities were, and kind of grounded myself a bit more in terms of the decisions that were to follow.
Yeah, my strategy of it's my outline, no, wasn't the best.
So I went to UVA Law School. It was pretty much the only place I wanted to go. And I will tell you all, I got in off the waiting list the day classes started. So I really did spend every moment of those 3 years incredibly grateful that I was there, because I felt like, wow, I just got in on, you know, by the skin of my teeth. And so I worked incredibly hard and really felt very happy to be there. Law school for me was all about problem solving. So you hear these really difficult cases and you can understand both sides, and then you have to make sense of it and come out with something that's going to be right and hopefully please both sides. And that is something that I use every day. You know, what I do doesn't sound like anything that I learned in law school. I train young women to see themselves as political leaders, but really what I want them to see themselves as is problem solvers. And so that knowledge was extremely useful to learn in law school.
I'd go back for a year and then drop out, honestly.
No,
honestly, I would
really?
have taken that first year, and that first year you learn so much of what you need to know in terms of the intellectual aspect of law. You learn the basics, you learn what stare decisis is, you learn what strict constructionism is, you learn how to use those points to talk on TV, and you're done. I would third of the debt, out of there. But that's just me. Questions. I think that there are people who will bring you a microphone if you have questions. I can't actually see very well with the lights flashing in my face. So if you have a question, kind of do a dance or something.
Yeah, of course, take it.
Or not.
Oh, thank you.
Really? You do? Okay. Just grab the mic. Make it happen.
Hi.
So you first, and then we'll go to you. Okay.
Okay, there we go. Hi. First of all, I want to say that this is a really great panel, and I was very happy to hear all of your stories. You talked a little bit about conveying sort of beyond the grades, beyond the I went to law school, some more. What I got out of it anyways was like the extracurricular, the stuff you do outside of just going to class. When you network with people, it's a little easier to say, okay, I'm president of this and I do this. But when you're sending out cover letters, what do you suggest that you say to sort of convey to people, look at all this passion that I'm putting into an organization or this nonprofit without sort of sounding completely obnoxious?
Thoughts?
Well, I always customized every cover letter. I never sent out a general cover letter. And what I tried to do is really think about the job that I wanted at that particular entity and the skills that they would probably be looking for, and then what in my resume matched with those skills. And so, and to put that forward. So I think that's where you can get all the extracurricular stuff in, and the ways that you can show, when you read a good cover letter, like the person's enthusiasm comes off the page. And it shows the research that they've done about, your place of business. It shows how they're using their extracurricular activities or things that they've done to, bring that passion to what you want them to do. And I think it also shows you show kind of a flexibility in terms of what a job could entail, because you don't always know exactly what it would be, especially when you're first starting out. So, leadership positions that you've had within an organization or internships that you've had, all of that stuff is really important to get on the page, and way more important than any awards or anything like that.
I'm in the position where I actually read a lot of cover letters from people who are trying to convince me that they've done the lawyer thing, but now they really want to write. They really want to try out writing a column, being one of our freelancers. Sometimes when we hire staff, the same thing. And one of the things that I look for is people who are not trying to, the way that I call it is to spin that law degree back into gold, right? Like they've so invested in getting the JD and doing all that work that now by the time they get to the cover letter, they've just got to prove that getting the JD was really important, really was still worth it. You don't need it, right? If you're applying to a non-traditional law job, you don't have to convince me that you didn't make a huge mistake going to law school, right? It's something you may have to convince yourself and your mom, but you don't have to convince me. You gotta convince me that you are really committed to doing this new thing, and that's something, something you're passionate about, something that you think is awesome. You're not trying to use a stupid freelance column at Above the Law to make up for all of the mistakes in the past. And I think that a lot of times people who are trying to transition out are trying to show that they didn't waste 3 years, they didn't waste 5 years, they didn't waste 6 years. And that might be important for them, but for the employer, they don't really care.
And I would just add too, passion, as Patty said, passion really does speak off the page. And so, and not just your own passion, but when I read a cover letter that's filled with passion, but they don't know anything about what my organization does, that's no good. So, being able to channel that passion and say, I would be so great working for your organization because, and then make sure that you're very knowledgeable in the letter about what they do. And then the other thing that I would just say, you know, as somebody who works with women and sees some of the barriers to women putting themselves out there as much, is make sure you sell yourself really well and don't hesitate, because I do see a difference in the cover letters often between the male and the female applicants, that the women don't always do as an aggressive a job as selling themselves as they should.
Absolutely.
So.
Actually, there's the guy behind. You think you're next?
This is on? There we go. So thank you all for coming. I really appreciate you guys talking about knowing what you want to do, but sometimes that's kind of hard as well. I personally would like to go into politics and things like that, but then there are some days that I really just wish I wrote for Wong Ket and could make fun of that entire world and be, you know. So I guess, Dawn, you spoke about kind of weaving in and out of law. When you've done that, especially for Ellie and Carlos and John, when you've done that and left for kind of more artistic realms and things like that, was there ever a worry in your mind, like, if I go down this path, I might be closing a door behind me that I can't get back through? I can't weave back into? Have you ever, has that been a worry, I guess?
I'm not quite sure how to answer that, because I really never looked behind. I sort of look forward, you know, try to see what direction it's going to go down. I would say that if I wanted to go, I mean, at this point, I've not really practiced in over 10 years. So going back and trying to get into, you know, a strict practice of law would probably be difficult. Would it be impossible? Probably not. Could I find a way to spin what I've done in a way that could get me a foot in there? Possibly. If I wanted to go into the policy realm, I could probably do that if I really set myself to do it. I don't think it's impossible to go back to something that you want to go back to. The question becomes, at what level are you going to do it? Can you do it at least the lateral level? Do you have to go back at some lower point? Or can you somehow spin what you've done in order to aggregate it and do it into something that's allied that could get you at a more advanced level? I'm sorry, it's a very sort of sloggy answer, but you know, it's what I can toss back right now.
John?
I mean, as much as I want to get away from the law, there's no way getting away from it. You know, I, as an owner of a company that provides musical consultation to hotels and restaurants, you know, there are contracts that are involved. There's things that, there's always an implement of law that's required. But what I've been able to do is, you know, I've been able to spread myself thin, if you will, excuse me, by being able to kind of maneuver myself back and forth with the law and knowing which one, and from there, finding that balance is tough. But once you're able to marry your passion with the legal, you know, background, then you're good. But it's a hard answer, you know, knowing what you want, but that's really up to you, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I closed that door and I welded it shut, right? Here's an interesting story, right? So I'm not admitted, and the reason why I'm not admitted, I never got admitted to the bar, was because, first of all, at Dev Voice, you didn't really have to. You know, you could just, I wasn't going to be in court ever, so I was just doing my thing. And then when I realized that I really wanted out, what I have the papers and it's all sitting there. I just got to sign my name and send it, and then I go and I swear, and right? But the problem is that once you have that option to go back, I felt, then it becomes a lot harder to go forward. So when Carlos says he never looked back, like, I think one of the things that we've talked around the issue of money. They pay you so much money, more money than you can reasonably expect to make in your new career for years and years and years and years. And when you're trying to close the door, at least I found, when I was trying to close the door on that kind of money, the inability to go back and have some of it was really helpful to me. Now, John, very smartly, was like, I still want some of that money, right? And so he found a way to do both, right? And so I think that if you can find a way to do both, that's great. But you have to go into it thinking that that's what you're going to do, right? Carlos and I kind of went into it thinking like, all right, we need to, you know, no more, no mas, right? Again, I think it goes back to really knowing what you want to do. If you want to keep, you know, fingers in both pies, you got to kind of go into that from the start.
Good evening. My name is China Dickerson, and I'm a student at Howard University School of Law. And my question goes to what John spoke of about marrying maybe your creative side and your creative interests along with the practice of law. So my question relates to resumes. People keep telling me I need to stop with the 2-page resume. But if I have, my passion is politics. If I have jobs where I've done politics, but I also have jobs where I've done the law thing, and so I'm trying to marry those two, then that means I have a longer resume. Is it the absolute rule that it can only be 1 page?
I don't think so. I mean, do you all think so?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
I think it depends. I mean, if you have an interesting resume, if it's just padded with boring things, you know, then
But
then
everybody
no, but
thinks they have an interesting resume.
well, this is
that can't be the rule of thumb because everyone thinks they have an
You want a
interesting
1
resume.
page.
I have a 1-page resume. So I've been out of law school, how long? 2003. I worked for 3 years before law school. People generally think I have an interesting background. You know, it gets harder, I think, as you add more things to your, you know, to your CV. But just as a frame of reference, you know, you know, I've made several transitions, and I hold myself to that 1-page resume. And so just understand that there is, I think, an assumption taken by yourself that you are so interesting that your resume has to extend 2 pages when there are people that are much further along and have done potentially other things that can find themselves to 1 page.
And that's why it's so important to tailor your resume to the specific
Exactly.
occupation that you're applying for. Then you could kind of cut down all the previous employments that, you know, doesn't really apply to that job. So yeah, it's important for you to not send these mass emails, but really just kind of focus.
Yeah, you don't need to have 1 resume.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you can have versions of your resume. If you're if the potential employer is someone who is more policy oriented, then you emphasize that as opposed to someone who is law. And you can also do your resume thematically. I mean, I have a long life, so I have a long resume, which I can reduce down to 1 page because I do it, you know, law and government. Or I do, you know, law and politics. Or it might be film. Obviously, is what I top things off with these days. But you know, you can give a head and then do that. You can also talk about your skill set. Save your passion for the cover letter, but keep that also short. I mean, it's great to be enthusiastic, but you have to learn how to express that passion concisely, because you're only going to have so much time before someone in their eyes.
The other thing
Just make sure you keep ACS on it.
The other thing I would say is that since we are living in 2012, Google. Like the other reason why I don't need your 2-page resume is because it's the first thing that I'm going to do when I get your 1-page resume is that I'm going to Google it. And if you've got passions that kind of maybe didn't make it onto the resume, it really should make it onto Google. And if it's not really going to make it onto Google, then maybe you're not really that passionate about it because you haven't been able to build it, right? So there are 15 different ways in this day and age that I can find out more about you if I'm interested. I've had a couple of people in my current job they've sent in a cover letter and 1-pager, but then when they've shown up for an interview or whatever, they've had a more kind of elongated curriculum vitae with their portfolio and their, you know, I can't really say that works better or not, but I'm certainly not going to read more than 1 page. So if you get to the interview stage, then that might be a more of an appropriate opportunity to expand on what you've got because they've already shown that they're interested in you.
Thank you. Can I add one last thing that I think that all of you are at an age where you know it already. It's been drilled into your head, but also Facebook and Twitter. Take down anything inappropriate before you apply anywhere, because I have rejected people based on what I found, or people have come to me and wanted to be recommended for jobs, and I will check, and see what's out there, and to make as a protection for myself. But I think the thing to remember is that when you graduate from law school, you have the degree, and you will hopefully, unless you really screw up, always have the degree. But you also have your reputation, and that's really the biggest thing that you fall back on in your career, and what helps you get ahead and into other jobs is your reputation. And in a sense, that's it, right? So just be really careful to protect it.
And to go back actually to the toolbox, right? I mean, you're lawyers, you're supposed to have some discretion. Have some discretion on Facebook and Twitter. I mean, it's almost, sometimes it's amazing to me how easy my job is, because people will just say, lawyers will say ridiculous stuff on Facebook and Twitter, and then I make fun of them on the internet. It shouldn't really be that easy, right? Because one of the things that being a lawyer and going through this process is supposed to teach you is a modicum of restraint, right? It's a modicum of discretion and knowing what to say and where to say it. So certainly if your Facebook page is not up to that standard, you should really look at it before you, not just a non-traditional legal job, any job. You should have your Facebook and Twitter, your social media profiles synced up and locked up tight.
Yeah, and just one thing, a woman working for me once put on Facebook how much she hated her job. You know, that's something that's never okay. So.
Other questions? Cool beans then? All right.
Okay.
Thank you for having us.